So he gets up there, the defendant, the resident himself, he gets up there and he's testifying, trying to defend himself about whatever. And at some point during his testimony, he explains that he and this woman used to be together, and when they were together, they would do cocaine pretty consistently in the apartment. So of course he utters that phrase, and I'm sitting there at the table. I make a little note. And I say, I'm going to come back to that point.
Hello, 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 and welcome to By the Fifth Podcast. It's your boy Roger Trent, but as you know, you can call me Tico. What's up? So, I got my girl today in the house as always, my co-host Tiffany Flowers. How are you, Tiff?
Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. All right, we don't know when you're watching this, but we are recording this on a Wednesday, hump day. You had a good day so far, Tiff?
So far, so good. I'm home now, and I am scheduled to move on Friday. So I've got a lot of boxes and a lot more boxes to pack. But how ironic, we're talking about apartments, and here I am getting ready to move from my apartment.
Well, we are sometimes both in the industry and both a product of it, right?
Yes.
So on both sides. So awesome. Well, good luck to you on that move. I know how that can get kind of crazy.
I appreciate it.
That's not an eviction, is it?
It is not. I know. That's what I thought about.
Voluntary move.
Yes. Thank God it is not. And let's hope I can stay on this side of that and never have to deal with the other.
Keep it that way. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Well, Tiff, why don't you go ahead and introduce the voice that we're hearing and the face we're seeing pop up?
Yes. So today we have joining us Nathan Lyberger. You heard him just speak about or kind of joke about an eviction. So he is actually an eviction attorney. So he works with a lot of different communities. Unfortunately, when we have residents that do not pay their rent, he is the one that gets to represent us. And I apologize, Nathan. I read your bio, but I forgot. How long have you been doing this for?
So 12 years I've been an attorney, and the 8 years before that was in the industry, working my way through law school, that kind of thing. So 21 years altogether now, 21 years in September. So what's that, half of my life now?
Well, congratulations. So you just said something. I guess maybe this is something that we never talked about. I've always known you as an attorney, but you said 8 years prior to that. What were you doing in the industry then?
So I've worked in the same office. I'm now one of the partners at Hall Associates, but for the first 8 years in my career in this industry, I was what we call a case coordinator, which basically backs up the attorneys and answers client phone calls, questions, defendant phone calls, this kind of thing. So I was doing that for those previous 8 years. 4 years just living my life outside of undergrad and seeing what was next. 4 years I went to law school, and then for the time since then, I've been a practicing attorney at the same office. But I've been inside the same building now for coming up on a quarter century.
Wow. Well,
I guess I'm not going anywhere anytime soon.
I was hoping you were going to tell us a story about how maybe you started off on property and you started off as the guy that maybe got to do the grounds. I was expecting another story. So if you can make something up, make something up for us real quick like that, that would be awesome. But I was really ready to hear one of these stories that was like, are you serious? I never knew this, but
it's a pretty vanilla path that I've taken.
Okay. Well, I guess probably what leads up to that as well. So again, you've been doing this for a number of years now. How did you get into this? I know when you first go to law school, you don't always know what you're going to practice probably. But what led you to this career path or this part of the law?
So I'm from Nashville. I went to high school here, and I went to St. Louis University. So I spent 4 years in St. Louis pursuing a degree up there. At that point, I wanted to be a police officer. I really couldn't tell you why at this point. I think I saw a movie or two back then and said, "Oh, that'd be kind of fun and flashy and everything." So I was a criminal justice major in college. When I was finishing that up, I did an internship with the sheriff's department here in Nashville. I spent at the time, it felt like a long, long time. It was 7 weeks, which is just a blink of an eye nowadays. But 7 weeks when you're 22, I guess, is a long time. So 7 weeks I was with the sheriff's department. I got hooked up after that with Wes Hall, Hall and Associates, with the Wes Hall, and
Mhm.
started working for him in September of 2004. And I'm just not one for change. So here I am, 20 years later, doing the same thing. Like I said, I spent those first 4 years right out of undergrad saying what maybe a lot of us said when we got to that point is I'm not going back to school. That's enough for
Mm,
me. 4 years in, I said, well, I want to have a family. I want to do this and that and the other. I need to do something to advance myself a little bit. So for
right.
me, that was law school. So I
Okay.
went to what they used to call the YMCA night law school. So,
Mm.
it's not all that exciting to tell people that you have a law degree from the YMCA night law school, but that's where it's from. And a lot of great, I mean, they've produced a lot of great attorneys, a lot of great judges, that kind of thing. But what it allowed me to do, and I tell people this, I get people asking me every now and then about thinking about going to law school and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And I tell them, do what you want to do, but the Nashville School of Law, the YMCA became the Nashville School of Law, and it
Mhm.
really allows you to pursue that degree without, going deep in the hole for it. It's kind of it's financing so that you can pay as you go, you
Right.
get out without any debt. And for me, I slid right into the position I'm in now, and it's worked out for me just great.
Well, good. So I guess it was meant to be.
Let's think, yeah, I'd like to think
Okay.
so. Yeah,
You.
the other thing you hear a lot of is people, oh man, I should have done this or I should have done that. I don't feel that way. I like
Mm.
what I do, and I've liked where the path I took. So
Well,
if you're
good.
interested in law school, go out there and get after it.
Okay. Well, good. Well, again, thank you for doing what you do. I know we do a little bit of business together. Unfortunately, it's sometimes, well, it is under those circumstances where we do have an issue. But yeah, interesting story. And then I'm going to ask you about St. Louis later because I did not know that you were in St. Louis. And I went to
Hmm.
school in St. Louis as well. Small world.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
Hmm.
there you go.
Wow. Wow. Well, I have a question for you. So, being in the property management industry, there's so much goes on in this. There's families that are living there. There's elderly people that's living there. There's roommates that's living there, which seems like there could be a lot of trouble people
Hmm.
could get into on site, as well as the people who are living there.
Mhm.
Tell me this: what is the biggest challenge do you think that property managers these days are running into on properties? And I know there's a lot, but what's one of the biggest things that you're
Yeah.
seeing right now?
So I think, and it probably started with COVID, like so many things did, right? Is that when for those, gosh, it wasn't just a few months; it was maybe a couple of years where everybody was kind
Years.
of trapped on top of each other.
Hmm.
Um, I think that, and then kind of the way that things are moving in the political world combined to really give people a lot of what uh, they're not ashamed to express their mind however they want to, and in whatever way they feel like they
Hmm.
need to. So there might be, my experience has been in what I've seen in the courthouse and what I've heard from the managers that I represent is that people are just so much more brazen now than maybe they were just a few years ago, just 5 or 6 years ago. um where whether it's social media, kind of blowing those kinds of stories up, or it really is that this experience is happening. I think people feel more threatened by their residents than they ever have before, and I think it makes life as a property manager uh, more stressful than maybe it's ever been. I tell my clients this a lot: is I get the benefit of sitting behind this door and behind this desk, and most of what I do in my office is over the phone. If I'm dealing with
Hmm.
people that are wanting to be rough on me, so all I got to do is hang up the phone. If you come up to this office, we've got like a quickie mart kind of glass thing that we talk through. We've got this.
Yes, they
We're
do.
protected. We're protected.
Mhm.
So
I
I don't
remember
have to
the
worry too
first
much
time
about.
I went up to the office and I was not expecting that when I walked in. And I was like, what is this glass partition that we have here? I was like, how do I order one of these, you know? But yeah, it's quite interesting if you've never, I hope no one ever has to go to their office. But if
No.
you do, just know that there's a partition between
Yeah.
you and the
And it's
employees. So try it if you want to. Try it if you want to.
yeah. And it's not, I hate that it makes people feel a certain way when they go in there because it is almost like a prison cell in that little waiting room we've got. But things are the way they are, and you got to
Mhm.
protect us from from whatever might be out there.
Right.
But again, most of the time, I'm benefited from being on that phone or being behind that glass, and I know that's not always the luxury that our clients have. So being in that office and having somebody across the desk from you, pointing at you, bucking at you, all this, it's more than ever, and
Mhm.
I don't envy the folks that are behind the desk having to deal with that for sure.
Oh, now are they things that are turning physical, or is it, where people are just feeling the unsafe because of what they're saying?
I think that's what it's. I don't see more instances of people actually coming to blows about it, but
Okay.
I think people are just the way they speak is maybe
Mhm.
more aggressive than what we're used
Mhm.
to, and you know you
Mm.
you don't expect that. And I'll say this: when they come to my office, it's because there's a path that got them there, right? I mean,
Mhm.
99% of the residents that you all deal with probably are just fine. I just never see them. The folks
Right.
Right.
that end up in my office are the ones that have done these things and that have acted a certain way. And that's not even fair, really, to most of what we see here. But
Mhm.
every now and then, you get some folks that are a little bit out there, and that's what I hear a lot of my managers. We've had clients that have written special addendums just to specifically address you can't talk to us a certain way, or you can't do this and that and
Yeah.
the other. And I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to be putting up with that. Um, so I think that's most of what we see is people they just love to run their mouth now.
What
And
So,
he's saying is 100% true.
yeah,
I will stand behind that. I will testify to that. I think people just feel that they don't have anything to lose these days.
hmm
Sometimes people are just in a situation they're like, well, whatever, it can't get any worse than this.
God.
And then you go to court and it gets worse.
Mhm.
a- and I'm like, so you can write an addendum for like how people speak? Like you can do that?
Well, it's you can write an addendum all day. You can write an addendum says anything, right? Whether or not that wins the day in court
Gotcha.
is not as always a slam dunk of a situation, but it certainly couldn't hurt, And if
Okay.
if it gives you a reason to say, look, you signed this addendum to remind them that you've agreed to act a certain way,
Hmm.
maybe it calms down a situation every now and then, but it's hard to de-escalate things once they've risen to a certain level, no matter how many
Hmm.
addendums somebody signs.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Man, I don't envy you, Tiffany, in that.
That's
Oh my
okay.
gosh. Listen, I remember people coming and flipping out on me in the
Hmm.
office. And I remember, having people who had mental issues,
hmm
and they would come into the office and they would go off and they would leave these messages, threatening messages, but it was because there was issues that were going on that was medical related,
Hmm.
but I was just trying to I was just trying to rent an apartment. You know what I mean? And I didn't have the training to deal with that part of it. You know what I mean? So it's always great to know that there is a person we can call or a law firm that we can call and say, hey, how do you deal with this? I think I made
hmm
that call to your office quite a bit back in the day.
Yeah.
What do I do
hmm
about this?
No, you're
So,
you're absolutely right. Well, I had something else I was going to say, but now I forgot
Well,
it. Keep
I'll
moving
tell you
on.
this. I remember it's been some years ago, and unfortunately, we had a resident that was having issues paying their rent, so they did end up under an eviction. And again, we'll tell people, hey, you need to speak with the attorney. You need to go down there. And one particular resident that went down there, she was not happy, and she made some threats against the attorney's office. And I don't know if you told me this story, Nathan, or not. I know you've got so many stories. But when I heard the story of what she said, we shouldn't be in disbelief about things anymore. But what she threatened was with fire. And I was like, I don't know if I would threaten fire while I'm speaking with the attorney in their office. So like Nathan was saying, yeah, there's crazy stuff going on, things that people wouldn't have said, 2, 3, 4,
hmm
5 years ago. Again, this
mhm.
was a couple years ago. But yeah, people will threaten violence. And you're just
We
like,
had a
but yeah.
I was in court with a guy, and so three ways that I usually deal with defendants. One is on the phone, one is behind that glass up there, and the rest of the time it's in the courthouse. There's courthouse security everywhere, right? So I don't have
Mhm.
much to worry about in the courthouse. But guy, we were getting into it about who knows what, about his case or whatever. And he says to me, he's like, "Man, if I was out in this parking
Oh.
lot, I'd jack you in the jaw." And I said, "That's why I don't go out in the parking lot. Like, that's why we're in this courthouse in front of the judge. I'm not trying to get jacked in the jaw
Mhm.
about any of this. I'm just trying to enforce the law a little bit here."
Again,
Right.
people have nothing to lose. They have
Yeah.
nothing to lose, and that's what you got to be careful about because, yeah, they
You
can
know,
Ooh.
the
just
other thing too, we
jack you in the
see
jaw.
that's right. I don't want that. We used to say that back when Nashville, well, when I started doing this 20 years ago, Nashville's a different city,
Mhm.
and we used to say that it was the same 10,000 people or so that would run through this eviction process, and they would all just kind of take turns every couple years doing it. And I still think that's a little bit true, but that guy specifically that was going to jack me in the jaw, he was very comfortable in the courthouse, and
Oh,
Mhm.
I
wow.
think the courthouse is meant to inspire a little bit of awe in the civic duty to follow the law, this kind of stuff. And for the folks that have become so accustomed to going in and out of those doors, there's just not a lot of respect for that anymore. And
Mhm.
sometimes we are all the beneficiaries of that disrespect, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Wow. So what are the biggest misconceptions that residents have in regards to their rights in that apartment?
Yeah, well, I think what I hear a lot of, and the internet still says this, and now that AI is so prevalent, I think there's a lot of even more misinformation out there. But we
Mhm.
have residents all the time come to court, and Tiffany, you know this. There's really not that large of a window of time that they have to pay before you can start this eviction process.
Mhm.
So sometimes we'll be in court. Let's say today's June 4th. Somebody owes their May rent. We were in court with them a week ago. We're in court with them at the end of May, and they say, "Well, I don't even have my 30 days." So 30 days is not it. I mean, if that rent's behind 5 days, this process can start pretty quickly if the lease says what it does, and or what it should, and most of them do. So the process can go real quickly. I tell this to people all the time. The law in Tennessee allows you to do a 14-day notice if they're breaching the lease for some other reason, a 3-day notice if there's violent or dangerous behavior. But if you didn't pay the rent, and the lease says what they always do, you don't have to send a notice of any kind. So what I tell folks is that you can get to court faster if you don't pay rent than if you killed somebody in your apartment. So I think a lot of people get to court thinking they've got more time than they do, and brother, that's just not the way it is. So I know, and Tiffany, you guys are in this boat. Our goal is not to evict somebody, right? Our goal is
Correct.
to get that rent paid. And so we do. If somebody shows up in court and they have some proof to show us that the rent's coming or that the money's there and they just need some time to do it, we'll usually be pretty amenable to that. But um, it all happens a lot faster than most people are ready for. And it's just one of those lessons that you really don't learn until you go through it yourself.
Right. And I wanted to go back a little bit. Could you explain what an actual eviction is? Because, like that last comment that you just said, most people have no idea what an eviction is until they're in that situation. And then when
Yeah.
that happens, like you said, there's so much stuff on the internet that is not true. So there's a lot of
hmm
misinformation. But what is an eviction exactly? What does that mean for the normal resident that, you know,
Yeah.
always
So I
does
think
everything
for
that they're supposed to, but something happens?
Yeah. So I think for most folks, they come to court, and to be honest, the word eviction is never used on any court documents. It's not used in any of the judgments that the court generates. But obviously, most people refer to what I do for a living as the legal eviction process. And really,
Hmm.
it comes down to three pretty simple steps. Is one, there's got to be some violation of the lease. So obviously, you can't just evict somebody because they looked at you sideways. There's got
Correct.
to be some violation of the lease that has occurred that allows you to, terminate that lease. It's a contract, just like any other contract, and there's terms and conditions of it. And if they're breached, there are remedies allowed to that. So you have to have a violation of that contract. Um, Sometimes there's a notice that's required. Mentioned that a little bit. Sometimes there's not, but there has to be some thought given to that. If a notice is not required, great. If a notice is required, there's got to be some written notice given to indicate, hey, based on this violation or this behavior, we're terminating your tenancy and you've got to be moved out. And then if they don't vacate in accordance with that notice that you give them, or because they didn't pay rent, what you then have as a housing provider is the right to claim that they are unlawfully detaining the premises from you. So detainer warrant is the phrase we hear a lot in the eviction world. And what that means simply is that the resident no longer has a right to be there because of whatever the violation was. And now they are unlawfully detaining the premises from the rightful owner. So we go to court, we seek a judgment that orders the person to move out. Uh, and if that judgment's granted, if the judge orders them to vacate, they then have 10 days to move out before we can send the sheriff's department out there to supervise their physical eviction from the place, in which they're anybody that's in there and any personal property that's in there is set out to the roadside. And that's what I tell folks in court is like, this is a pretty simple process, but if you get to the end of
This
it and you haven't
podcast is
done what you
being
need to
brought to you
do,
by
it's an ugly
Apartment
end.
Community
And
Functions.
It'll
If you need
happen.
an event,
Don't be
let us
surprised if it
know. We
does.
can handle it. After all,
So that's
we
it's
evented
just
it.
that's
Check
a
us out
crash
on
course in eviction, right? There's all kinds of twists and turns
apartmentcommunityfunctions.com.
that can happen to derail that process. But that's normally what it looks like. And you're right, the people that haven't been through it before and don't have any reason to know about it, they're blindsided by how quick it takes. And I hear that in court all the time is first time I've ever been through this. I said, well, I hope it's the last time that you go through it.
Right.
Most people I think learn from their mistakes. I was, when I started this, I was 22 and I could see myself winding up in a bad spot.
Mhm.
Back then a bad month could put me behind and put me in the wrong spot. So, uh, there's a little bit of sympathy and empathy that goes along with it, but at the same time, we've all got a job to do.
Right.
Right.
Well,
That is so true, Tiff, because I get a lot of people who call me and they have, well, I seen on the internet it said that they can't and they won't. And it's like, oh, you might want to call an attorney or,
mhm.
Yeah.
because you're getting a lot of misinformation. One of
Yes.
the biggest calls that I get is about roommate situations. All the time people call me and say, hey, you're in property management, what should I do about this roommate situation? What would be the one piece of advice that you would give them if they're going in as roommates?
I want to hear
Uh,
this. Yes, because
well, I'm gonna say the first piece of advice is probably don't have a roommate. That's not realistic
Right.
for a lot of folks. And I've had roommates in my past. I mean, it's just the way you got to operate for some period of time. Um, but it's just like, my mom co-signed for my first car loan. I missed the very first payment, and she called me up and said, "What are you doing? You just got this thing. You missed the first payment. What's the story?" So, oh, sorry, mom. Got it
like,
straightened out.
what's a
But
car payment? Right.
yeah, right. Who? Yeah.
What?
Huh?
Um, so, uh, when you're signing on with somebody, you're joining up for whatever goes wrong with that contract. You're both on the hook for it, right? So, I mean, you better know going in that if something goes wrong, if especially if it's a relationship, if
Mhm.
two folks that are in some kind of romantic relationship, right? If something goes south, you got to have some plan in place for who's going to handle what, who's going to do this or that. And of course, going into it, you don't think those kinds of things are going to happen, but half the time they will. And I tell folks in court this all the time too. The person that ends up in court on all this usually is the person that's the more responsible party, right?
Mhm.
If you got two people on a lease, one of them skips out and leaves the other one holding the bag. The one that's still there, the one that shows up in court, usually the more responsible person is the one that's going to end up paying all that rent. Y'all hear this vacuum in the background?
No.
Are you hearing this vacuum cleaner? Good,
I don't
good.
think
No.
so.
I'll just keep talking and I'll try to ignore it myself.
Well, I'll
No,
say
some
So,
one thing about, like you said, number one rule for roommates, don't get one, right?
mhm,
But that was a good one. But I would say number two, and this is for anybody, whether they have a roommate or not, read your lease,
yeah.
right? We send the lease agreements out to people so they can read, and we ask them, let us know if you have any questions. And nobody ever has any
hmm
questions.
Mm,
And then they go online and they read stuff that could or could not be true. And now they've become an attorney. They've all of a sudden
hmm
gone through 4 years of law school. They've specialized in something else. So again, but I think that's the biggest thing. Like if, when it comes to roommate situations, if they read the lease agreement, and I don't know the verbiage, you can probably repeat it a little bit better than I can, Nathan, but it says something about like separate and together, and
Yeah.
it's somewhere along those lines. And sometimes that can be difficult to explain to residents what that
No,
actually
you're right. So
means.
it's joint and several liability,
Yep, there we go.
which, yeah, means essentially that if you're hooked up with somebody on this lease, you guys are both responsible for everything. So a
Hmm.
lot of times we'll get to court, and the resident who's still there, who's still trying to make things right. I paid my half, they didn't pay their
Hmm.
half. You got
Yeah.
to get this money from them. And I said, look, when you guys sign this lease contract together, we don't care where the money comes from, but until it's all paid, we're going to come after both of you, or
Hmm.
anybody on the lease for it. And I mean, again, it's a hard lesson to learn, and
Hmm.
folks know. I mean, you can just see the when they hang their head about it, they know what they've gotten into. They
Yeah.
understand pretty quickly what the concept is, but it still, it doesn't make it any easier. And then, so of course, what happens with the resident that moved out, maybe on the contract they're responsible for their half of the rent, or for their for the rent. But what happens is, if they don't show up in court and they
Hmm.
make themselves hard to track down, it becomes almost impossible to ever hold them legally responsible for that contract. So you got a lawsuit against the party that is, again, trying to do what's right. They end up
Hmm.
paying the whole thing because the other person went back home to Georgia, or you know ran off wherever and just disappeared, for lack of a better term. And it's a bummer for the person left behind. It's one of those things, again, though, one of those lessons that hopefully, when it happens once, folks learn. You better
Yeah,
know who you're getting onto this lease with. Yeah.
man. Does okay? So if a person has someone come in and stay there, but they're not on the lease, will they start to fall into the squatters' rights thing? Does that
Well, the
become a part of
squatters,
it?
that's in Tennessee. We're doing okay with that. We've got pretty good laws in Tennessee that say if somebody moves in there. Um, well, let's back up a little bit. So you got one person on a lease. They move their
Mhm.
friend in. Then the person on the lease skips out.
Hmm.
You got somebody in there. Nobody knows who this person is. They're just
Mhm.
residing there. They refuse to leave. Tennessee has pretty good laws about getting them out pretty quick.
Okay.
That's not the case everywhere. I've heard all kinds of stories in Atlanta, and really all
Yeah.
across Georgia, where folks just 6 months are just jacked up in somebody's place, and nobody can do anything about it. So Tennessee, we do okay with that kind of thing. So the squatters
Nice.
is not a big concern up here. But what you do find a lot of is, um, somebody moves in, and they know the person they're moving in with them can't pass their background check,
Hmm.
can't pass whatever you need them to pass. They kind of sneak in behind you, and then you're stuck with somebody on property that probably doesn't need to be there. And that's a little tougher situation. As long as that resident is still staying there, it becomes a little bit tougher to root out the real problem if there's somebody in there that doesn't need to be. And usually we
Mm,
don't have a problem with those folks until they start causing trouble, and then
right.
it becomes a bigger issue. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Oh man. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to get advice from people who study this thing because like we've said, man, between the internet and old uncles, we get the craziest advice, and it doesn't
No,
it
it's
doesn't hold
it's
up
true.
in court.
And you're exactly right. That's who they cite is, well, mama said, or the
Right,
internet said.
right.
And the other thing I find too, when we go to court, the person whose name is on the warrant, they're willing to be reasonable and maybe discuss a certain outcome. But if they've got somebody with them who doesn't have any skin in the game, they don't
Mhm.
mind running their mouth all day long. I mean, they'll be the loudest person in the background hollering about, you shouldn't do this or you need to do that.
Mhm.
I said, if I can just get this person alone for a minute, they're going to make sense. This other person they brought with them to court is the one poisoning everything for them. So it's a lot easier to run your mouth when you don't have anything to lose.
Yeah,
Like
you
you
don't have
said,
any.
Tiff.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, why not? Why not just holler about this as long as I can?
Hmm.
Uh,
Man.
you're right too. There's because the law says so many things, but when you get down into the courthouse too, it helps to be familiar with the judges and the courtroom and the way things operate, and because those things they can change at the drop of a hat too. So I would, anybody out there, if you got something that's bubbling up uh, with one of these types of situations, reach out to an attorney and see if you can't get some advice about it before you start jumping in with both feet, because it can get messy quick if you're doing things the wrong way.
Mhm.
That is so good. I tell you what, I was on site recently, and somebody who worked at that property came and they were like, "Hey, you used to be a property manager. Can a person do this and that?" I said, "Oh," I said, "I've been out of the game for a while. You know how quickly laws change." I
Hmm.
says, "You need to call an attorney because I
Mhm.
I I can't tell you, But
Hmm.
I remember just when I was on site, laws changed all the time,
Hmm.
and they say, well, Roger, you can't do that now, So I love what you said about making sure that you're getting the right information from the right
Hmm.
person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then I
Right.
wanted to say real quick too, and I think this is something important. So hopefully our viewers know is like, the majority of people in most jobs, we care. This is not a
Hmm.
part of our job that we want to do. Um, but when it does come to these evictions, like Nathan said, there's usually something that has happened that has brought us to this place. So it's
Hmm.
not just, me or whoever else the property manager may be making up stories. Usually, I'm going to say always, something has happened for us to get to this point where this is the last thing that we have available, a tool to us
Yeah.
to try to make things right. But yeah, we're not making stuff up. If you didn't pay your rent or not. We're
Hmm.
we're we're not making that up. But I think sometimes people think that, oh, well, I put in a work order, maybe something happened and people are trying to retaliate against me. No,
Yeah.
that's not generally what we do. And I think another thing that people don't realize is that, like you said, Roger, there's lots of laws, they change, but those laws are put in place to protect the residents and also to protect ourselves too as employees. So again, there's always going to be a rotten apple in the bunch, but for most of us that are doing this job, we're not making up things to get rid of people because the less residents we have, it actually makes our job harder.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's
That's
right.
So
That's
we
right.
want to
for
keep
sure.
residents. We want everybody to have a place to live. This is not something that we want to do. It actually
Yes.
makes
Yeah.
our jobs harder. So hey guys, just know we're not doing this as our first option. This is actually coming down to we have no other choice. So
No,
Yes.
exactly. And
Yeah.
to your point, no other choice is at some point you've got an option of either letting things just continue on, letting the rent go
mhm,
unpaid, or letting the rules continue to be broken, or bringing them to court. And
mhm,
you can't just let it last forever, right? At some point, the other
right.
shoe's got to drop. And I've been in court before with folks that owed a $25 trash fee, and they just refused to pay it month after month
Oh
after month. And they'll come to
God.
court and they'll tell me, "Y'all, are we going to evict me over this trash fee?" And I said, "You're going to let yourself get evicted over this trash fee?
Mm.
Pay this $25 and be done with this thing." So at some point, and I've made this point to the judges too, is my client shouldn't have to, the landlord, the housing provider shouldn't have to take somebody to court to get them to adhere to these rules.
Mhm,
We don't want to be here any more than the resident wants to be here, but like you said, Tiff, we got no alternative. At some
mhm,
point you got to do something, and the only thing to
yeah.
do to file that detainer warrant.
Yeah, man. I love how you reworded that. That was perfect. That
I've
was
gone through that little
perfect.
spiel a few times, you can imagine.
Sounds like. Well, tell me this. We're at the portion in this podcast where, we ask the guests, has there been anything, or tell us a story about a time where what you do has made you want to buy a fifth?
My fifth.
Yes. We're
Um,
listening.
Buy a fifth.
All ears are open
there's
now
been
for sure.
there's been a handful of these, of course, over the years, and so people when they ask me, say, "Oh, man, you do that for a living? Oh, you got to have all kinds of stories." I said, I do, but I don't like telling them. I mean, they say, "Oh, you could write a book," and I said, "I don't want to
I
read that
could.
book. Who wants to read that book? All these sad stories." But we had a guy who this took. It was, I think, over the course of 4 years, this whole kind of thing went on. But at the end of the day, the eviction that finally took was about a 13-month process. And this guy, he was living in subsidized housing. Government was paying for his place, and there's a reason for that sometimes, and sometimes maybe it's not a good reason. And in his case, I'm going to argue it was not a good reason. Um, because what the landlord was getting complaints about was other residents talking about, there's always these people. These people look like they're homeless in this place. What are they doing hanging around the breezeway? And they're down here charging their phones and uh, and this kind of thing. Um, so they started, they instituted a policy where they were ID checking everybody that came on property. They put cameras in the breezeway, all these types of things. And this dude is pretty slick, so he did things in a way that you never really could pin him down. They do inspections in his apartment. He had two bedrooms. They were both padlocked. You know, you don't see that every day. Something weird's going
Right.
on in this place. They would try to question these transient folks that would be drifting around his apartment, and they would mumble and kind of walk off. Whatever their situation was, you weren't going to get much information out of them. So, I mean, for a long, long time, they were monitoring this place. They were in touch with the Antioch police, all these kinds of things to try to pin this dude down because they knew he was up to something in there. So finally, uh, an ex-girlfriend of his decides that whatever happened between the two of them, she's going to rat him out. So she comes to management and says, I'm ready to fess up. I'm ready to, all these things that are going on. And it was, they were gambling in there. They were running drugs in there. There was prostitution stuff going on in there. I mean, every crazy thing you could think of that you might have seen on The Wire was happening in this dude's apartment. And it was finally her that kind of broke the case open, right? So we go to court, General Sessions Court, which is where all these evictions usually start. General Sessions Court, we got a judgment. She appealed that, drug it up to circuit court. He, rather, appealed that and drug it up to circuit court. Eventually, on the day of court, we had 6 different security officers to testify about the kinds of things they saw. Now, what they saw was all outside of the apartment, so it was difficult for them to really pin it to him. But then we had our big star witness, get up there, and I used to date him, and this is the stuff that was going on in there, and listed off all these, crazy things, and everybody's sitting there with their mouths just dropped to the floor. This is wild. Um, his attorney still wanted to argue about whether or not any of that was true, and that she was just trying to get back at him. And this lady was facing, they were threatening her, they were throwing rocks at her and stuff on the property because that,
Oh
because
no.
she was working so hard to get them evicted. So attorney still tries to paint her as just he had her heart broken and now she's upset with the dude or whatever. So he gets up there, the defendant, the resident himself, he gets up there and he's testifying, trying to defend himself about whatever. And at some point during his testimony, he explains that he and this woman used to be together, and when they were together, they would do cocaine pretty consistently in the apartment. So of course he utters that phrase, and I'm sitting there at the table. I make a little note. And I say I'm going to come back to that point. So whatever else he said, I don't remember. What mattered
Mhm.
was
It
him
didn't matter.
him saying that. I stood up and I said, Judge, we've heard a lot of testimony today from a lot of different people. I hope the court took note of what this man said when he was on the stand and admitted to illegal drug use in this apartment. Pretty consistently said the court did take note of that, and uh, I don't really know what the judge thought about the rest of the testimony. It didn't matter. The one piece of
Right.
evidence that made the day. But so it was a nice outcome. And looking back on it, great. At the time, though, I mean, that was 13 months of just
Oh
pure
yeah.
hell trying to put together all
Oh
these
my
security
gosh.
statements and all this stuff, trying to pin this dude down. I mean, it felt like, like I said, when I was in college, I wanted to be a cop. So it felt like I was some detective on the case kind of thing. It was a little bit
Mhm.
fun to do this kind of work for a minute, but
Uh-huh.
but that it took me round and round on that. When that happened too, you try to when he uttered that phrase, I said I made I know my eyebrows went up, and you try to make eye contact with the judge and say, I hope you clocked that the same way I did. You were paying attention,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
I don't need to really hammer that home any more than I need to. But so that dude got kicked out after those 13 months, and part of me wants to think we won in the end, but he also got a place to stay for free for 13 months that
13
Right.
he was
months.
running drugs out of. So he did okay for
Yeah.
himself
Ah,
too. I'm sad to say.
oh my gosh.
That was a tough
So
one.
so 13 months of this for him to finally just give the whole thing up. So he
Yeah,
fought all of this
exactly.
to say, and by the way, I'm doing
That's right.
cocaine. Like,
That's right.
what?
And you know what? This happens a lot with marijuana. That might be the first time I've heard somebody so nonchalantly admit to,
Talk about cocaine.
rampant cocaine use.
Crack cocaine.
But
Crack
but
is what?
with marijuana, I think people just forget that it's illegal. They surround themselves in this world where everything is just,
Yeah.
a world that I can't even imagine living in. And I think they just
Mhm.
forget sometimes that, yeah, what you just told us was pretty illegal stuff.
Right.
So.
Wow.
Too bad for him, I
Wow.
guess.
Oh my gosh. So here's my question. Did you buy the fifth or
In
Oh,
during
celebration
that
that it was
13 months?
over.
I probably closed the bar down the night that that case went the way it did. Yeah, I might have bought a few fists when I was celebrating that win.
Right, right, right. Okay, so it was a fifth of celebration, like,
Yes.
it's finally
By the end
over.
of it, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I do kind of have a question, just like you mentioned about the defendant, and they were speaking of their drug use.
Mhm.
I need some advice. I've been in the courtroom a couple of times, and sometimes you see some things that might make you giggle a little bit. Sometimes you hear some things that might make you want to giggle. How do you keep a straight face in front of the
Well,
judge? I know you've had a
if
few years of practice, but like,
that's right.
I need to master that. I need to master that. Give us
Well,
some tips.
I wish I could, right? A
Oh
lot of
no.
times, and it's not so much that I find myself giggling anymore, because like you said, I've been doing this long enough. What I
Mhm.
find myself is that I've just got this look on my face, like, we got to put this stuff to an end. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the sovereign citizen idea, but there's folks out there that have dug up this theory on the internet that essentially they've declared themselves to be a citizen that is sovereign, their own sovereign citizenship outside of the laws of the United States of America.
Mhm.
So they don't find that the Constitution has any authority over them or that the laws of our states have any authority over them. And so they come to court and they explain to the court that you don't have any jurisdiction over me. Your judgeship doesn't mean anything to me. I can do whatever I want to, and that's the way it's going to be. And I mean, it's this whole philosophy. It's worth Googling if you feel like wasting an hour or two of your time. But some of them are just down there reading a script from the internet and just trying to get away with something. Some of them are in the thick of it, like true believers in this stuff. And so that well, I had a case today with one of these folks, and maybe the fifth or sixth time I've been in court with this guy. And immediately when the judge calls the case, he starts down this path, and I mean, I know my face was just, you know,
Here we
I
go
didn't hide
again.
anything about what I was feeling about it. So I could do honestly a little bit better job of that because I find myself not giggling as much as I used to, but now I'm just like, rolling my eyes and oh, come on, give me
Are
a
you
break.
kidding
It's
me?
a whole
Yeah.
body roll now, right?
Not
Oh,
this
it is right.
again.
It's a full body roll. That's right. That's right.
Oh
I did
man.
have we were up in court. This was up in Clarksville a few years ago, and I had a defendant was up on the resident was up on the stand testifying. I don't remember what about, but something she said. My client thought the manager was sitting next to me thought was ridiculous, and so she starts laughing,
Uh-oh.
and yeah, so the judge turns around on her. The judge didn't see where the laughter was coming from. He heard it, but the courtroom was full of people, and he said, "Y'all better not be laughing about this thing in here." And I mean, my client kept a straight face. She wasn't fessing up, but I said, "Yeah, if you can avoid laughing at the person while they're testifying,
It's probably a
try
good
not to
thing.
do that,
Try
especially
not
if
to.
it's your case."
Mhm.
But you get that every now and then. Somebody gets up there, says something ridiculous, and the whole courtroom starts laughing. And sometimes the judges are pretty cool with it. Sometimes the judges start slamming that gavel, and you know, this person's up
I
here handling their business. Don't you be laughing at them, kind of thing,
I remember
which is
when you
fair.
told us that someone was waiting to receive their payment for their rent from Elon Musk.
That sounds like a sovereign
But
citizen guy. We've
but
had a little
some
bit of that too. Is that
someone said
that?
that they were like they spoke with Elon Musk and he was going to be
Mhm.
paying their rent. So that's what they were waiting on.
We've had some of that. We've had some. I've had a
Wow.
few people. This was more COVID stuff, right? I guess they associated the COVID money with like Trump bucks. So they would say, "Oh, I'm waiting on Donald Trump to pay my rent." And I said, I mean, sometimes they
Good
were
luck.
right. Whether or not it was him paying it, right?
Right.
Right,
The
right,
government was
right.
paying it. So whatever you want to call it, that was a little bit of that going on back then too. Yeah, I'm waiting on my Trump bucks to
Wow.
come in.
That is wow. Well, I tell you what, like Tiff said, we want you to stay in these apartments,
Mhm.
right? We don't
Hmm.
we don't want it to come to the point that you end up, having to be in that courtroom.
Mhm.
We want to see you pay your rent, and hard times happen. We know that
Mhm.
they do. you know, and I don't know about you, but I always feel better when I'm able to help somebody not end up in that situation,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know. So, hopefully you can take some of this advice and
Right.
listen to some of this and use it to maybe help you get out of a situation or help a family member to get out of a situation, and get through it smoothly. And I'll tell you, yep, we have to do a job. Absolutely. There's things that we have to do. But I can also tell you that sometimes just being nice will go a long way.
Hmm.
So cussing out your property manager, cussing out your attorney, it's
It's
not going to
whatever.
get you.
It's a Wednesday. It's
Yeah.
a Wednesday.
Right.
I
Well,
will say, as far as advice goes on that point, I think so many people end up in court because they just ignored the problem until it got out of hand.
Yes.
If today's June 4th, if you know your rent's going to be late in June, do something about it.
Right.
Contact somebody, do something. Don't just sit and hope that it goes away, because it's not going to go away.
Mhm.
If you need help, there's agencies out there that still have money
Yes.
left over from COVID. Get out there and get after it. Don't just let it wash up and come
Right.
get you, because it's going to,
And that's what I was going to
sooner or later.
suggest also, like with resources.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I love my job, but they don't pay me enough money to pay everybody's rent on property. But I mean, just don't. But we do have a list of resources. And again,
Hmm.
hard times fall on people, unfortunately, all the time. We never wanted someone to be in a desperate situation. But that's why we have a list. So,
Hmm.
you can contact us. We can be like, hey, try reaching out to these people. We can't guarantee that they're still going to have money left or what they're able to assist with, but we'll try to give you information so you can get some assistance. But I think that people forget that sometimes that stuff is out there. I can give you the list, but you got to make the calls. And I've seen it many times where people have reached out to different agencies and we have gotten payments on their behalf. So, like Nathan
Hmm.
was saying, the money's out there. You just got to, when we give you the numbers, you got to call and see what you can figure out and how they can help you. There is help out there still.
Yeah.
yes,
I would
yes.
say to reach out and make those calls, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing, right? Make that call once a day until something shakes loose. Don't
To the
don't send
agency,
one email.
not
Yeah.
to the
No, yeah,
agency, but
that's right.
not don't call me 10
Let's
times a day.
clarify.
That's a
To the
fair
list
point.
of
Yes, to the
resources.
agency.
Say
To
that
the
again, Nathan.
agency.
Please say that.
That's right. Yeah, call every day to the agencies.
Yes, thank
Bug
you.
them until that
Thank you for
payment shakes loose.
clarifying. Yes,
Uh,
yes.
that's a fair
Oh
point.
gosh. Well, listen, this has been great, and I'm sure that the audience has learned a lot, and we're always learning, right? I don't care how long you've been in the business, you're always learning something new.
Mhm.
So we appreciate you being here today. And what is the best way for property managers and I don't know if you represent people who have homes that they rent as well,
Hmm.
but how would they be able to reach out to you?
Yeah. So again, my name is Nathan Lyberger. I'm with the law office of Hall Associates. We've had an office here in Madison, northern side of Davidson County for about 40 years now. So
Mhm.
my email address is nathan@hall.associates. No .com or .net or anything, just nathan@hall.associates. You're welcome to shoot me an email. Our office number is 615-868-4101, 868-4101, the same number it's been for 40 years. So that's, or if you look around your office, there's probably a piece of swag on your desk somewhere that has our contact information on it. So yeah, feel free to reach out. We do, Roger, like you said, a lot of our clients are apartment communities, but we certainly do still represent incidental landlords, we call them, folks that maybe just have a few houses on the side, kind of thing, or whatever you got. At least give us a call, and if we can't help you, we might be able to find somebody that can.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again. We do appreciate you taking your time. I know you're a busy man, but we thank you so much for visiting by the fifth. And Tiff, you got anything else for us?
No, I think that was pretty good. I hope, like you said, somebody can take some information from that.
Hmm.
If they have questions, depending on what the question is, whether or not Nathan can answer it, he's available to ask questions. And then I guess too, just on our podcast, if our viewers have questions, again, we're not legal counsel, so we cannot advise you legally what to do. But again, like Nathan said, if we have resources, we can always try to point you guys in the right direction so you can get the help that you need as well.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I'm going to double down on your disclaimer there. But everything we've talked about, I'm an attorney, but these cases are so case by case.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody on listening to take anything I've
Google
said as
you.
legal
Google, you
advice.
said, I heard Nathan say on Google.
Yeah, that's right. If you need help,
Right.
contact an attorney, contact our office, whatever. But get some specific advice about your situation. Don't
Yes.
rely just on what I've said. Take my advice and talk to an attorney.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank
thank you
you.
all for watching and listening. And please be sure to share this, like it, take a moment and subscribe. We need your subscriptions. But we thank you. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The name is Trent, Roger Trent, but you can call me Tico. What's up?